Hello everyone, my name is Roisin Meaney and I am delighted to be with you, except I'm not really with you, I'm just on the camera. I'm sorry that I'm not in your class like I would normally be. I love going into classes and I love meeting children and I love having a bit of fun with them and having a laugh. But you know what, we'll do the best we can today and I hope you enjoy it anyway. And you know that I'm talking to you now because I'm a writer. And my library, and the name is up there, Limerick City and County Library Service. The ladies in the library asked me if I would make this video and they would then send it to any schools that wanted it. Because of course libraries are all about books and reading. And they love to see people coming in and getting books and reading them. And this is just me talking about books, and talking about reading, and talking about writing, because that's what I do. I'm a writer. I used to be a teacher. I used to teach in Limerick City, the Limerick School Project, if any of you know it. And then I started writing when I was still a teacher, and I was doing the two jobs. I was writing sometime, and I was teaching other times. And then my head was getting too busy, because half of my head had writing in it and the other half had teaching in it. And I was getting a bit like this, because it was too full and things were falling out. And I thought, okay, I think I just have to have one job. And I think I have to choose, do I want to be a writer or do I want to be a teacher? And I had to have a little think. And I thought, well, I love teaching because I love being with children, but I also love writing and I love making up stories and making up people to put in the stories. So I thought and thought and thought, and at last I decided that I would be a writer. So I said goodbye to all the children in my last class. And my last class was actually 4th class. And I said to all the children, I'm going to give you a present before I leave, because you're my very last class. But I'm not going to give you something that you can eat, because it'll be gone, and you won't have it again. And I'm not going to give you something that could wear out like a pen, because that could run out of ink, or a pencil, because that would just wear down. Every time you pair it, it gets a bit shorter. Or I'm not even going to give you something like a notebook, because you could lose that, or you know, you could use it all up and then, you know, you might just get bored of it. So I decided I would write them all a story, their very own story, with them in it. And I had 26 children in the class, so I had to write 26 stories, and it took a long time. I didn't know it would take so long, and I was a bit sorry I promised them all a story, but I did. And I got them all done, and I gave them all their stories. And I'm going to tell you one of those stories, actually, at the end of this. It's a kind of funny story. Some of them were funny, some of them were, well, actually, they were all kind of funny. But they all had the children in them. So I'm going to tell you Saoirse's story. Saoirse was a lovely girl in one of my classes, in that class. So I'll tell you Saoirse's story at the end. And I'll draw pictures. I'm going to draw pictures on this board. I am not a good drawer, so the rule is no laughing. Of course you can laugh because I won't see you, so you can laugh if you want, because the pictures are not going to be good. I can tell you now, the pictures are not going to be good. Anyway, so I decided to be a writer. And I started writing. Well, I was writing when I was teaching, so I kept writing. But guess what the hardest thing about writing a book is? Can you guess what the hardest thing is? Well, if you guessed getting an idea, you're right. Well, I think you're right. Some other writers might have different thoughts about that, but that's what I think. I think getting an idea for a story is the hardest thing. So do you know what I do? I have a plan how to get ideas. I have this secret weapon. Now, it's not really a weapon, it's just a little notebook. It's a tiny little notebook, actually. And it fits in my pocket. See how small it is? Look how thin it is. But there are plenty of pages. And what I do is I bring this notebook out anytime I'm going outside. If I'm going for a walk, if I'm going into town, if I'm going wherever. I bring my notebook and a little pencil with it in my pocket. And anytime I see something that I think is interesting and that might be good for a story, or anytime I hear something that I think is interesting and that might be good for a story, I write it down in my notebook. And then I don't forget it, because I don't have a very good memory. So when I got home, if I didn't write stuff down, I might forget it. And then it would be gone forever. So that's why my notebook is a good idea. And then when it's time to write a new book, I look through my notebook and I see, okay, let's see. Oh yeah, I remember that. Oh yeah, that was good. Oh, that thing too, yeah. And then I get an idea for a story. And that's how I start my stories. I get an idea. So one time I had an idea about a lady who lived on an island. Now there were lots of other houses on the island. It was a lovely island actually. I just made up the island. It wasn't real. But there were lots of people who came for their summer holidays to the island because it was a lovely island for a holiday. There were lots of beaches around the edges and people could go sailing in the sea and go surfing and lots of other things like that. And they could also walk on the island, and there were a few mountains on the island and they could climb mountains, and there was lots to do. So every summer the island would get very full of people, and I thought, okay, I'm going to have a lady who has a house on the island. She lives there and that's her house. But she wants to make some money because she's a bit short of money. And she decides that she's going to let her house, she's going to let people stay in her house and they can pay her money to stay in her house. But she has to get out of her house because they don't want her there. They just want to have the house to themselves while they have their holidays. So she has to go and live with her mum and dad, who are also living on the island. So she moves back with her mum and dad and she lets her house and she makes money. So that was my idea for the story. But then I had to have lots of other ideas too, and lots of things happening in the story. Because you can't just have one idea. You have to have other things happening in the story. So there were people who came to stay in her house, and they had different stories. They had other things happening in their lives. So I was able to write about them too. So that's the kind of thing you do. And there's lots and lots of thinking to do when you write a book. It's not easy. It's actually a very tough job, writing a book. Do you know how many words I have to write for an adult book? I have to write about 90 or 100,000 words. Now that is a lot of words, isn't it? That's an awful lot of words. But what I do when I'm writing is I say, okay, I'm going to try and write 1,000 words every day. And if I write 1,000 words every day, how many days would it take to write 90,000 words? That's easy, isn't it? 90 days. But actually, it usually takes a lot longer because it doesn't always happen that I write 1,000 words every day. Because some days, I'm just not in the mood to write. Some days I might be tired. Maybe I went to bed too late. Maybe I didn't sleep so well. Maybe I don't feel so well. Maybe I have a pain in my tummy or something. And I don't really feel like writing. And other days, I might write a little bit, but then I might have to stop because I have to go to the dentist maybe. Or I have to go and visit somebody who's sick in hospital or something. So I don't get a lot written that day, maybe only 50 words, or 100 words, or 200 words. So I have to keep trying to write 1,000 words every day and catching up if I don't get the 1,000 words done. So it would usually take about 150 days, or maybe 200 days, to write my 90,000 words, usually. And that would be a few months. And then when I have those all written down, and when I think I've written my story, and when I come to the end, guess what I do? I go back to page 1 and I read all through it again. And it might be maybe 300 or 400 pages. So it takes quite a while to read that. But I'm reading it very slowly as well, because I'm looking for mistakes. And I'm looking for bits that aren't so good. Because when you're writing something for the first time, called a first draft, it's not really your best writing, because it's the first time you write it. And you know, like the first time you do anything, it's not the best thing you'll do. You have to practice things. You have to practice playing the piano to get good. You have to practice playing tennis. You have to practice soccer. Or you have to practice anything to get good at it. And it's the same with writing. So when I finish my first draft, I know it's not the best I can write. So I have to go back and I have to fix all the bits as I go through. So that takes another month or maybe 2 months. And then when I've come to the end the second time, that's my second draft, then I think, okay, I think it's okay now. And I send it off to my editor. Now the editor is the lady who checks through the book and makes sure it's okay. So she reads it, and she probably finds things that I miss. Because you know when you're writing something, and it's only your eyes are looking at it, and it's only your brain is going into it. Maybe there's things that you can't see, because you're too close. And because you can't really step away and look at it with fresh eyes. But my editor has fresh eyes, so she looks at it with her fresh eyes, and she reads it, and she sees things that I don't. So that's good, because then she'll tell me other ways to make it better. So I go back and I write another draft, and this would be draft 3. And I go through the book all over again, and I fix bits that my editor says, that bit, you could do that a bit better. And maybe that bit, you could make it a bit better. And maybe change this character, because I don't think they do that. I think they do something different. So I have to do lots more thinking. And then when I get to the end of the third draft, usually my editor says, that's fine now, but it's not finished. Then I have to send it on to a copy editor. Well, my editor sends it to the copy editor. And the copy editor is kind of another type of editor. And she's looking for mistakes. Any mistakes. Big mistakes, like if I got somebody's birthday wrong, maybe I said somebody had a birthday in February in the first part of the book, and maybe I forgot when I got near the end of the story, and maybe I said her birthday was in September. Maybe I got that bit wrong, and the copy editor has to find those mistakes. Or maybe somebody's eyes, I might get the colour wrong. Maybe I say they've got blue eyes in chapter 3, and maybe I forget in chapter 7, and I say they've got brown eyes. So the copy editor is watching out for those kind of mistakes. And she finds all those, hopefully. She does usually, because she's very good. And she sends back the book to me, and I have to check and make sure I'm happy with all the changes she made. And then the last person who sees the book is called a proofreader. And the proofreader's job is really just to check it again. So he's another, or she's another checker. And they read it all, and they might still find mistakes that everyone else missed. Sometimes they do. And then I have to go back and check and see, okay, what did the proofreader change? Oh yeah, he changed that. Oh, I don't know, I think I prefer it the other way. And sometimes I change it back, because it's my book, and I'm really the boss of my book. But sometimes I think, oh, I'm glad he found that, because that was a mistake, and nobody else spotted it. So it takes quite a long time for a book to be born. And then, at last, the book comes out on the shelf. And I go into the bookshop, and I see it on the shelf in my bookshop. And I'm so proud and so delighted to see it up on the shelf for everyone to see. And the first time that happened, when my first book was published, guess what I did? I went into the bookshop and I hid behind another shelf, near where my book was. And I waited, because I wanted to see if anybody would pick it up. So I saw some people looking at it, and I was saying in my head, oh, I hope they pick it up. And some people didn't. Some people just walked past. And then a lady came along and she picked it up, and I got really excited. But I kept hidden. I stayed hidden. And I thought, oh, I hope she buys it. And I saw her looking at the back and reading the blurb on the back, you know, the bit at the back of the book. And then I saw her opening the book and reading a little bit at the start. And then guess what? She put it back on the shelf. And I was so upset and so disappointed, I stopped hiding and I went home. And I thought, I can't do that anymore. I just have to hope that some people will buy the book. And they did, luckily. And that's why I'm still writing books now. And I'm still coming up with new ideas. Of course, that's a thing that writers are afraid of all the time. What if I don't get the next idea? That's why I always bring my notebook with me, wherever I go. And that's why I have lots of ideas written down here. And sometimes it works. Sometimes when I look through my notebook, I say, oh yeah, I'll do that. That'll be my next book. And other times I think, not sure now, do I really like any of those ideas? And I have to find other ideas in a hurry. So it's not easy. It's not easy writing a book. You have to be very hard-working. It's a hard job. And you have to be open. Your eyes must be open. Your ears must be open, because you're always looking for the next idea and the next thing to write about. And when you're making up a person to go into a story, you have to think about them for a long time. I wrote a couple of books for children. Now, they're for older children than you. But when you're in 5th or 6th, you might like to have a look at them. This one is called Don't Even Think About It. And it's a girl's diary. And the girl is Liz, and she's living with her dad, because her mum and dad have split up. And she lives with her dad, and it's just the two of them. She doesn't have any brothers and sisters. She's an only child. And it's all about her diary. So she writes in her diary, and she doesn't show anyone. And that's why I called it Don't Even Think About It. Because that's what you'd say, isn't it, if somebody came along and tried to read your diary. Because it's private. You don't want anyone reading it. So that was one book. And the other book I wrote for children, I wrote it with my friend. My friend's name is called Judy Curtin. She's written a lot of books for children. So we wrote this book together, and it's called See If I Care. And this is one of the characters in the book. She's called Elma, and she lives in England. And she is pen friends. You know what pen friends are? People who write to one another. And she is a pen friend of Luke, who's a boy who lives in Ireland. And they're pen friends because their teachers are friends. Even though one teacher is in England and one teacher is in Ireland, the teacher in England is actually Irish. So she went to England from Ireland. And she knew the other teacher in Ireland. And they decide they're going to get their classes to write letters to one another. So that's how Elma and Luke end up writing to one another. But they don't like each other, really, at the start of the book. And they don't want to write to somebody they've never met. They're not interested. And that's why we called it See If I Care. Because that's how they feel when the letters come. And we wrote this book together. Well, we didn't really write it together. Judy wrote Elma's story. She wrote the girl's story. And I wrote Luke's story, the boy's story. So Luke in Ireland, I wrote his story. And at the end of every one of my chapters, Luke chapters, I wrote the next letter that he wrote to Elma. And then Judy would write the next chapter, and she would put Elma's answer to Luke's letter at the end of her chapter. So that's how we wrote the book. It was very interesting. And maybe we'll write another book sometime together. One thing I would say to you is, reading is wonderful. And I do hope you like reading. I hope you like reading your own stories, or I hope you like reading other people's stories. And there are so many books out there. The world is full of books and full of stories. And there are stories really about everything. You know, so you might think, well, I'm not really interested in reading. I'm interested in soccer. I love playing soccer. Or I'm interested in space. When I grow up, I want to be an astronaut. I want to go up in a rocket and explore the planets, Mars, and the moon, and Jupiter, and everything else that's out there. Or you might think, I'm not interested in reading, I'm interested in drawing. I like drawing, I like painting. Or I'm not interested in reading, I like gardening. Or I like growing stuff. I like growing vegetables and flowers. But guess what? For everything that you're interested in, there are lots of books about that thing. There are books on sport. There are books on art and drawing and painting. There are books about space, so many books about space. There are books about gardening and books about fishing and books about anything that people are interested in. So whatever you like to do, maybe you'd like to just check out a book that talks all about that thing. Because you would be interested, I think, if you really like that thing that you like. But if you really like reading, that's wonderful too. And it doesn't have to be a story. There are non-fiction books. There are books that just tell you things, that just tell you facts about things. And it doesn't have to be a made-up story. Although they're the kind of books I usually like to read. I like to read the made-up stories. I like to read stories about people. And all the things they get up to. And all the ways that they connect with other people. And families. And some people who don't like one another maybe. And who do mean stuff. And maybe people who forgive if somebody does something mean to them. And maybe learn to, you know, like them again. And I like stories like that, where different things happen. Good things, bad things, just like in real life. Maybe sometimes scary things. Maybe sometimes really happy, really funny things. I just love those kind of stories. And I love reading other people's stories. And I love writing and making up my own stories. But sometimes you're a little bit scared sometimes that if I make up a person for a story, sometimes even when I don't know I'm doing it, sometimes I can put one of my friends into that person, put things that my friends do into that person just by accident. Like if I have a friend and maybe she's a little bit shy, I might make that person in my story shy. And I don't really need to be copying my friend, but sometimes it just works out that way. So if I do find out while I'm writing the story, oh, that person in the book is very like my friend, I try to change them a little bit in the story so that they don't seem like a real person. Because I would just be a little bit afraid that maybe they wouldn't want to be in a story. And they might feel that I've been mean by putting them into the story. Other times, people want to be in the stories. And I remember a man I know, he's very funny. And he's a friend of my friend. He's a friend of my friend. And he said, Roisin, will you put me into your next story? Will you call somebody by my name? And his name was Kirby. Well, his name was Mike Kirby, but everyone called him Kirby. And I said, okay, Kirby, I'll call somebody after you. But guess what I did, just as a trick? I called a dog Kirby. And I knew Kirby wouldn't mind. I knew he'd laugh at that, because he would just find it funny. And he did. He was delighted to have a dog called Kirby. So we all had a good laugh about that. So reading and writing, yeah. When I was small and reading, oh, it was wonderful. I used to go home from school and I used to just start reading. And then my mum would call me for dinner and I'd be amazed that the time had passed. I wonder if any of you are like that. If you're a real bookworm and like reading so much. And I have photographs when I was a small girl of reading a book, and I'd be reading a book and then somebody would say, come on, we're doing a photo, and I would just take the book like this and I'd put it under my arm for the photo. And I have photos of me with a book like that, because I was always reading. I didn't like playing soccer. I didn't like doing anything else really. But I loved to read. And maybe that's why I'm a writer now. But I do think you have to be a reader to be a writer. Now, you might think writers are really rich. I'm afraid that's not true. Mostly it's not true. Some writers are very rich. Some writers who write very, very famous books, like J.K. Rowling, who writes Harry Potter, or like David Williams, who writes all his books. Books that everyone knows, and books that go all over the world, to children all over the world. And Roald Dahl, when he wrote all these wonderful books, probably made a lot of money too, because so many children loved them and read them. But there are other writers like me, and like lots of writers I know, who they sell enough books to be able to pay their bills, and to buy food, and to, be able to buy clothes when they need new clothes, and stuff like that. But they're not rich. So don't be a writer just because you want to be rich, because most writers don't really make an awful lot of money. But that's okay. They don't really want to make money, most writers, because they love writing, and they're just happy to be able to do it. So that's good. So, I promised you a story, and I'm going to do it now. Can you remember the name of the girl in the story? Be very clever if you do. Her name was Saoirse. So well done if you remembered it. And Saoirse was a lovely girl. She was in, remember the class? 4th, yeah, very good if you remember that too. Good. She was in 4th class, and I thought about her story, and I thought, I'm going to write a really funny, silly story for Saoirse, because she would get a big laugh out of it. Now remember I said I'm not a drawer, so just be ready for that, because the things I draw will look a little bit strange. Okay, I'll start. Once upon a time, Saoirse was going home from school. So here she is, Saoirse's jumper, school jumper, and there's her skirt and her legs. Okay, there she is on her way home from school. There's her shoes. Okay, and let's give her socks. And she was going home. Oh, I forgot her hands. There's her hands. Okay. I hope you're not laughing. I'm watching you. Well, I'm not. Saoirse was going home from school one day. What's wrong? What? Her what? Her head. Oh, yes. I haven't drawn her head. And you'll see why in a minute. One day, Saoirse, let's give her a school bag, actually. Let's just give her one of those school bags that you hold in your hand. Okay, there's her school bag. Now, remember I said I'm not a good drawer, so that's the best I can do. Saoirse was going home from school when a terrible thing happened. Her head fell off. It fell off and it landed on the ground in front of her. I told you this story was very, very silly. And it happened just as she was walking past the library. And there was a lady coming out of the library at the time. And the lady said, "Oh, little girl, your head just fell off." Saoirse was very embarrassed. She didn't know what to do. It had never happened before. But she couldn't say anything. Why not? Her mouth was gone. She couldn't hear anything either. Why not? Her ears were gone. They're there. She couldn't see anything. Her eyes were gone. All she could do was stand there and hope that somebody came to her help. The head was delighted. Did you see those lines that I was drawing there? They're just kind of movie lines to show that the head is moving. The head could move because the head was round, so it was able to roll. So it rolled down the road, delighted. It was free. Hooray, I'm free, hooray! Poor old Saoirse. The head rolled down the road. Now Saoirse did try walking, because she could still walk. So she decided, when nobody came to help her, because there was nobody else around, she decided she better walk. Now she had to be very careful. She was on the path, and she didn't want to walk out on the road. So she just walked very slowly, and put her hands out like this, so she wouldn't bump into anything. And she followed, well, she didn't know whether she was following the head. She hoped she was. She was feeling with her legs and feeling with her hands. She didn't really know what to do. Only keep walking very, very slowly and carefully. The head came to a tree. The tree was growing out of the path, and the head was delighted. The head actually was very clever. Saoirse was a clever girl. And the head started to bounce, because it wanted to go up and climb the tree. But it couldn't climb in the normal way. So it bounced up high, and it bounced into the tree. Oh, it was delighted. Now Saoirse came along, and Saoirse was putting out her hands like this. And she felt the trunk of the tree. Now let's do a long arm. She put out her hand, because I don't want to move her whole thing. Okay, her arm was very long like that. And she felt the tree trunk. And she thought, oh, I better stop. I'm banging into something. She wasn't really sure what it was. Just then, luckily, this came along. Nina, Nina. Well, actually, the siren was off. But it was a fire engine with a ladder on the roof. And the fireman who was driving looked out and saw Saoirse and stopped, because of course firefighters are very good for helping people in trouble, and he could see that something was going on here. So he stopped the fire engine. They were actually on the way back to the fire station because they had just put out a fire. And they were going back, and all the firemen jumped out when he stopped, because they thought they were at the fire station. So when they jumped out, they said, hey, we're not at the station. And the driver said, no, look, there's a girl in trouble. I think she's lost her head. So the firemen jumped out, and they looked all around, and then one of them saw the head in the tree and said, oh, we'll put our ladder up. So they took the ladder off the trunk, off the top of the truck. And I better take it off, because they didn't have two ladders, they only had one. And one of the firefighters ran up the tree, got the head, and put it back on Saoirse's neck, under her neck there. Oh, she was so happy to have her head back. Thank you so much, she said. I don't know how that happened. I'm so glad to have my head back, and we can take away her big long arm now and give her a normal arm. And they took the ladder down too. So the firefighters were happy that they helped her, because of course they wanted to help. And they said, would you like to come home in the fire engine? And she said, oh, I'd love that. So they brought her home in the fire engine, and her mother stuck on her head with super glue. She didn't really, and don't ever put super glue on your neck. Never, never. Don't put it anywhere, actually. Never go near it. And it never fell off again, and she lived happily ever after. And that is the end of the story, and isn't it the silliest story you ever heard? But thank you for not laughing, if you didn't laugh, but it doesn't matter if you did, really. So I hope you liked this, lads, and I really loved talking to you, and I hope I'll be able to go into your classroom someday and find you. Bye.